this. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready to rumble?
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Build Show, Monterey Live's Build Show for May. It's going to be a fairly brief show, short-handed for one. We've got a few people absent for various reasons, and partly because we needed to change subject material. So, on that point, let me go ahead and cover a couple things. So, we've got we've got various shows that are going through this summer break that we often take. We've got the new Railroad Empire series about layout construction and its various steps that I participated in as well. You're going to continue to see, and on the next show, get to see something fairly dramatic that I completed recently. But we've got to hold till then so you can see what that work is. That's allowed me to focus on this show about more layout specific stuff. So I had intended to start on the Russell Creek branch coal loadout. What you'll hear people call tipples. That's a generic term that's not entirely inaccurate, but in the railroad industry, you're going to typically hear washer plants or coal loadout or crushers, or there's a range of different types of facilities. Tipples a little less common. You see those in some cases when you have trucked up arrangements, but this is a decent sized construction that I'm building. And I had intended to start tonight and have most of that already pre-constructed on the underpinnings of that. It's not exactly a skeleton. It's like the skin that's on a lot of fiberglass automobiles. There's a substructure that's underneath that, basically an entire metal body with a fiberglass overtop. That's basically what we're going to build using Gatorboard. However, we're gonna wait a couple months to start that so that we can take this little brief break through the summer, and for a couple reasons, but largely so that we can keep that, so we can start on that construction and carry straight on through with that construction through the rest of the year. We're going to carry on. We'll build that building from start to finish. But I wanted to go ahead and take this brief time to go ahead and do the show since we had a schedule to do a very brief show for a couple things. One, if there's any questions or any oddities that you'd like to bring up that are related to the build show or to building crap, like in general, I'm open to anything on this show. I don't even plan on this show running very long, but if you guys have some interesting material, or if anybody does end up hopping in and is able to make time to jump in today, then great. We may carry on a little longer. Otherwise, if you've got some questions, bring those up. Also, if you have any questions about the specifics of a couple of things I'm getting ready to start talking about, and anything related to this show starting this fall when we start back, please add those comments, here, and I can add those to it in the YouTube comments. I'll be checking those to see if anybody has replied to this, because this is kind of a poll of some questions that I'm curious about the answer to in order to figure out how I want to put the show starting in August, September, how I want to put that on. So I had planned on showing largely just the construction of that building. However, I've been working a lot I've got a 3D printer recently, a resin 3D printer, DLP or SLA style printer, not the filament style, but I've got one of those, and I've got a laser cutter on the way. We're probably a couple months away from that being set up here so I can use it. But I'm going to do a lot of future construction on my layout with that. And while you're unlikely to see much of the 3D printer itself, because it takes a pretty good long time to process, you may see a little bit of the laser cutter. But what I'm curious about, and this is my question and my query, as we start back and we're doing things that utilize some pieces of software, do you guys want to just not cover that part at all and show the end results, or show in such a way as that you can do it with an X-Acto or what have you? Or are you any bit interested in designing in some of that software? Let me give you an example use case. So, of course, I'm using various pieces of software for 3D printing, which, by the way, is pretty inexpensive. I bought a $250 printer. This is not an expensive thing to utilize. Brian W's in one of our chats sent me a few of the critters and stuff that he's made with the same style printer I have, bears and beavers and deer and bear. Oh my! He's made some really nice signal boxes and stuff. You could really quickly pay for the 3D printer if you're willing to learn. If you're willing to learn the software. Now we can, and so far Brian W printed those. So far I've been printing test cubes and the like to learn that software, some basic tests that have some structure so I can figure out the tuning of my printer. However, in designing the cold loadout that I'm designing, I've been designing that structure in software, and I'm printing out each wall and putting them on the gator board and cutting the components out with just an X-Acto knife. I mean, I'm not using the laser cutter yet. I don't have it. I do intend to do much of that with the laser cutter, but there's also a benefit in designing in software, printing on paper, gluing it down to foam core, to gator board, etc. I've done much of that with my track plans, printing out my turnout templates, gluing them down, cutting around them, gluing the turnout templates to my road bed, and then just laying track across the top of those templates. So there's something to be said for being able to use the software for track planning, of course, for designing wall structures, for wall assemblies for the structures that you could print out in flat sheet and either cut them with an X-Acto. You could use a Cricut maker, or you could use a laser cutter, laser engraver of various kinds. So I'm curious, is anybody interested in us talking much about the software sides of that? Our own Miles Hale has quite a bit of experience with SketchUp. I've been working some in SketchUp. It's a good piece of software as well. We may talk about a few other pieces. But if you have any interest in the software, please add a comment about that. If I don't get very many comments about that, we're likely to skip over or very briefly cover that software and not go into it in much depth. But I found it to be a tremendous. Of course, I'm a computer guy. It's natural for me to work that way. But I had largely been working with just tools, all in relative one-to-one, because I work with computers so much already that I wasn't using them much in the design and execution of the railroad. But I've recently found that how much time that I can save and money that I can save. I mean, it doesn't take printing a whole lot of relay boxes or forget what the railroad calls these things right this second, but it doesn't take a whole lot of printing these before you've made up your money's worth. I mean, I bought several of the BLMA boxes that are $5 or $6 a piece probably. So it doesn't take long, especially if you start printing figures, which I have a lot of interest in doing. If you're buying Prizer figures of $15 for five, $15 for 5 figures, you're paying $3 a figure. You're either going to end up with a very low population layout, which is pretty suitable for an Appalachian railroad such as mine, or you're going to spend a tremendous amount of money on printing road vehicles and detail parts, etc. Resin printers and any of the printers, FDN printers. Miles printed these Coca-Cola signs that are just absolutely superb. That's not, they're not painted yet. They'll really show off, but this is two sides of the printout that match up to make a pole mounted sign. These are printed with an FDN printer or a filament style printer where the roll of material comes off. Miles has quite a bit of experience, as do a whole lot of us in the community. A whole lot of us in our community are using filament-based printers or resin printers or laser cutters or Cricuts. Those are very popular tools in our community that we have done very little coverage of. Miles has talked a little bit about it, and since I'm kind of getting knee-deep in it, if you guys are interested in that side of the material, then let me know via Facebook or on the channel. Yeah, Al, I agree. That's exactly why we've largely stayed away from that. We have dipped our toe into some technical issues from time to time. Occasionally, we've done a little bit of Arduino stuff. Chris Hiley done, etc. It's very hard to do that stuff and not be talking to a pretty small audience. And I understand that may be a somewhat small audience, especially if it means that you're only going to be using a laser cutter or a 3D printer. That's why I think it may be of interest if I could show you some basic drawing capabilities that you could print out, glue down, or tape down in order to cut the building substructure out with just an X-Acto knife. I'm talking about that. This is the neatest little trick. And I see that Miles had covered these recently. I've had these for a few weeks. This is a little tool called the glue looper. I think I mentioned this maybe on Johnny's show one time recently too, but they're little goes in your X-Acto. It's an etched metal piece, and it has a little loop on the end down here. It has a very small loop on the end of it. The point of that is to pick up CA glue, particularly useful when you're doing a lot of 3D printing, gluing these pieces together. Honestly, working with CA in general comes in a bunch of different sizes. But I agree, Al. I don't want to get horribly technical. I think there may be enough if there is enough interest that I may be interested in covering the very basics of laying out a wall, so that you can send that through a Cricut laser cutter, or that you could cut it with an X-Acto, and if you could get it on paper. So I thought about, if there's interest, in adding an additional show prior to us starting the serious construction of the coal loadout later this year, and do one show where we do a very basics of how to take a picture and produce and figure out the actual dimensions to scale that out. So I've got a picture of the coal loadout that I'm working with, and I can take some dimensions from other places on the picture in order to figure out how large that structure is, and then put a rough plan of that into SketchUp, or I'll probably use a couple pieces of software, and Miles uses SketchUp a lot. So there may be a few of us talking about a few pieces of software, so that maybe you guys can have some different opinions. Because I have decided, since designing my track plan, which, as you guys may know, I have not done my track plan digitally. Despite a background in CAD, I had done my track plan 1-to-1, drew it out on paper, and then turned it into craft paper, brown, 3-foot wide or 30-inch wide craft paper that I had cut to the size of what I wanted my bench work to be, leaving the aisles. And I designed it with turnout templates and flex track with rolling stock and equipment on there, so that I could figure out what it was going to look like exactly. Get down at eye level and designed it that way. Since we designed mine entirely in AnyRail, good piece of software, done the job. I'm sure there's people using other pieces of software that do the job for them. There were some challenges there. I don't know if I could have just designed it in AnyRail and built it and been satisfied. I'm not sure about that. I'm curious. But I have got it designed. So since then, I've now spent some time doing some other design work, and that kind of increased my willingness to start doing some of this stuff digitally. I just didn't want to spend that much time doing it. So I want to redo my workshop. It's become a bit of an unwieldy mess, especially with the networking equipment that made a mess everywhere I turned. So I redesigned my workshop. I'm going to be doing that over the summer. That's kind of my summer project. I won't probably get 100%, but I want to get some of the major parts in place so that I can bring my printer in here, so that I've got room for the laser cutter when I get it. Since I've been spending some time doing that, I'd also started working on the 3D printing stuff. This is a Luke Towan item. This is also with the 3D printer. Part of the reason why I think a 3D printer is particularly useful in our hobby is that you don't need a tremendous amount of technical experience to use one. A little bit, and I would say that resin probably comes with more technical problems than FDN, than filament. I think it's probably better for most of us to get filament, but resin has such good detail. I mean, you're not going to print a deer with those little fine legs in filament base. It's just not possible. You could likely print relay cabinets in it, but they're going to have a texture to them. So there's different advantages and pitfalls, and resin has more technical challenges. I still don't think it's that tough, and there's so many of these that are already available that, much like working with Arduino, I think Arduino is a great technology for model railroaders because there's so much code already out there. You don't need to create the code for a occupancy detection or for a crossing gate unless you want to customize it. But if you're looking for the Arduino equivalent of what you could do with a Circuitron or other commercial detector, and you're willing to follow the steps and figure, and do the work, the code's already out there. You don't have to learn the code. And Luke Tower has provided a whole lot of these style small detail parts. He's providing so much of that stuff on his website. He's got these rooftop. That's a rooftop air conditioner, but he's got a bunch of these parts that are already designed and already available. And there's so much available online that you don't even need to learn the software. So I'm less inclined to get into the 3D printing and the 3D software, as what I think is still lacking is the more of the 2 or 2.5D stuff. Absolutely, Tim mentioned the Silhouette Design Studio, and what I need to do for for etching, I had not even considered that too. Is that there's so much of this that you can benefit from a very basic amount of drawing in computer software that you could do with yes, a laser cutter, but you could also print it out and etch it or run it through a through the Silhouette machine or the Cricut machine, um, or you could cut it out like I've done recently with the walls I've built so far for my cold loadout. I just designed them in software, printed them, stuck them down to the material, and started cutting on it with an X-Acto. So yeah, Rod says, Andy, never say can't because you'd be surprised how much you could print with filament. No question. I think there's different benefits. I adamantly am also headed in the direction of a filament printer. I will have a filament printer as well. There are things that you can do with a filament printer that are very difficult to do in resin, in my experience, in my very brief experience. I've only had a resin printer for about a month, and I've just printed a bunch of knickknacks so far as I'm playing with. And these Coca-Cola signs that Miles printed, these are done on a filament printer and NHO scale. I mean, they are 3/4 of an inch, give or take, and they're spectacular. There's no problem whatsoever with them. And filament printing, at least from what I can see, seems to be stronger. Um, Dwight asked about the health concerns of using this type of equipment. There are a little bit. There are some filaments out there that it would be better if you did not breathe, but most of them are safe. Um, Most of them are relatively safe. The resin is also relatively safe. If you watch a lot of YouTube videos, they'll talk about how caustic that stuff is, or how risky they are. And I do use latex gloves because it's sticky or whatever, but it's not nearly as caustic as some of the other stuff. Honestly, the MEK that I use as a plastics adhesive is a tremendously much more carcinogenic, according to the MSDS sheets, than any of the resins that I've worked with so far. So, I once said, telling my wife to worry about some of the chemicals that are in here, coming in and getting into some of the chemicals. There's some risk with them. I use, I etch some stuff, and the chemical that I use to weather corrugated siding, the actual metal corrugated siding, ferric chloride, that's a fairly intense reaction and a fairly intense chemical reaction that creates a fairly caustic exhaust off from it. So you really want to use to do that in a spray booth, um, or a vent booth of some kind, or you want to do it outside or in a pretty well ventilated area. It's relatively rough, and I've already showed that technique, and I would say that that's more caustic than the resin. Um, yeah, and Rod says it does stink. There is a smell concern with some of them. Now, I've got 4 different resins so far because I've been experimenting with mixtures. I've been experimenting with some quite strong mixtures with and adding some flexibility to them, because one of my desires is to print the sergeant couplers. That's part of the reason that I started with a resin printer. I should have, and I intended to buy an FDN printer first and experience that. And I am going to go back, or a filament printer, and I am going to go and buy a filament printer. There are things that a filament printer does that are very difficult in resin. Resin can be, or is generally, more brittle, and possibly has less strength, possibly, depends on the application, than what you may get with a filament printer. It depends on it depends on the application. But for printing these little sergeant couplers, and for printing especially the shapes on these sergeant couplers, resin is the way that everybody is already doing it. They've already figured it out, and it's out of the question with filament. It's just too small. But filament printer does have a strength that's pretty hard to argue with. So of the resins I've got so far, one of them is pretty bothersome. It has a pretty intense smell. Um, I am I cannot use that one overnight for sure, and but the other three I've got, or at least the other two that I've been using pretty regular, have effectively no smell. My wife, who's rather sensitive to that stuff, can't smell it at all, so I can't smell anything, so I'm fine. Um, but if the smell didn't run me out of here, if the smell was very bad, my wife would run me out of here. So it has to be pretty reasonable. I am working on an exhaust system. It's part of the reason that I want to redo my shop is so that I can, this has ended up becoming the collection spot for, for my buckets of tools and extension cords and wires. They need to go out of here, and I need to organize it, make a little bit of room. So I am going to be in a shop construction here soon. Um, Yeah, Brian says a little more brittle, and resin's a little more brittle and breaks easier. And it generally does. There are some. I have some resins that are fairly flexible, um, quite flexible. I should have brought some of those in here from where I've got my printer set up. But I've printed a few, 3 or 4 layer just sheets of the stuff the clear stuff, and it's pretty doggone flexible. So, but that's not strong. That's just less brittle. So I can reduce the brittality of it, the brittleness of it. Um, but you're giving up the hardness of it, or the strength, or the durometer is the measurement of that you're giving up. You're losing durometer in order to make it less brittle. Whereas filament kind of you're kind of at least from what I understand about it, you're kind of at the limit of the layer bonding. But it depends on, but you can print them in different directions to gain the strength of the individual layers laterally, and to not be at the mercy of the layer bonding conditions. So there's benefits to each one of them. But again, the 3D printing is likely to take too long to put together a show. I may sometime record some part of a print process that's fairly large, so it's out of the resin vat. I may print a short or record a short portion of that and do a time lapse on it or something. That might be something worthwhile to do to get a 30-second little video to show you guys. I do have Octoprint set up for any of you guys that are aware of 3D printers, even though my resin printer can't speak to that. One, because I intend to have a filament printer in the future, and it gives me the nice little webcam interface, and I'm already set up for a filament printer from the software side. So, and all the software that you learn for one is not identical to use for the other, but if you gain the skills to work with one of these bits of software and learn some of the terminology, like I have been switching somewhat back and forth between and messing with SketchUp some, because some of the drawings, again, there's so much available on the internet for this stuff. There's so many websites that already have so many little detail parts and vehicles and figures and structures and everything you can think of that you could just download and print, or download and very slightly modify and print if you're willing to learn a bit of the software. You don't have to become an expert, but if you just learn a little bit of the software so you can do a little editing or copy and paste pieces off from it. That's what I've done in my co-loader. Co-loadout is I've stole stairwells from other people's drawings. There's no reason for me to draw a stairwell from scratch. They're already available. Grab it, copy, paste, put it where I want to, shorten it, cut it, drop it in place. Even though that's definitely not something I'm going to print out on paper and cut out a gator board or something, but I'm designing the entirety of the structure and then peeling parts away so that I can turn them into a flat structure that I can print out of paper, so that I can cut it with an X-Acto blade, which is what I've done so far. Or if I have my laser cutter set up soon enough, I could run it through the laser printer. But then I'm also designing like the coal chutes and such, and I'm going to run those through the resin printer. Nobody makes those parts that I could find anyway. So that's just something that if I did not print those, there would be no recourse. I just couldn't have that part, or I'd have to scratch build it out of styrene or something. But being able to print it is a lot faster. Yeah, Ron said when you're printing, you still need to rotate the print. So you print the strongest way and blends the filament between layers. Yeah, yes, absolutely. Each printer has its own nuances. The same thing's true with the resin printers that I've already found out so far, is that with most of the resin prints, you need to pitch the print. If you're, it depends on what it is. You've got to figure that out, and I'm still figuring that out. Hopefully by later this fall, I will have learned enough to actually, have a meaningful conversation with people about it. But I'm still early in that phase. But you need to, shift it at an angle so that your support structures don't impact the or that you don't have to have, so that you can have the support structures where you want them, so that you can clean up easy for them, and so that you don't end up with a bunch of stupid support structures where you don't want them, where they're hard to get to, or where they degrade the surface where they contact of the print. So there's a bit of an art form to that, but my instinct is, and what I'm more or less asking is, would it be valuable to anyone to learn the basic of 2 or 2.5D drawing first, the SketchUp or equivalent pieces of software that would let you design a wall, print it out on paper, or print it and run it through a Cricut or a Silhouette machine in order to print out the paper, to cut out the paper, and then you could cut that out of an MDF, a 16th or 8th inch MDF, the way imagine that laser art, or let's see, MDF or Gatorboard or foam core. So far, I've used foam core for all my templating of it. When I get it right, I'm gonna cut it out of Gatorboard, and then I'm gonna clad it in corrugated metal. So, how much software might you guys be interested in? How much of the software side? It would only be an additional show that we would do that software side on. Then we'll go into the construction of that, and then maybe we may do another show on some of the 3D printing after I've designed and built some of the coal chutes and conveyors and some of those 3D parts that are going to be involved in it. Now, of course, we're going to talk about those parts regardless. I'm just curious how much of interest there is in the software side of it. Do we want to do shows that have the screen, the screen share on, and less of the cameras pointed down, more software? Also, you guys definitely pay attention to us on the Railroad Empire show. We're having a good time doing that, but that's the first show is just premiere. It's going to be quite different than what we're going to start on. This next show will be cameras over the shoulder. Well, Ralph has joined us after all. Welcome, Ralph. But so the curiosity is, how much of that do we want to cover? How much interest there is in the software side? Hey, Ralph, welcome.
Howdy.
We're not going to run much long. We're going to be fairly short tonight anyway. I'm just putting the question out to try to get people to respond to, is how much of the software side of things they may be interested in seeing after. We're going to have a brief break this summer, of course, on this show. And instead of starting on the coal loader that I've been working on, that I've been cutting walls from so far, we're just going to wait till the fall and start that one in August or September, whatever our first show date is coming back. And decide how much software we're going to do. Miles is using SketchUp. I've been using I've used SketchUp, and I've been using Fusion 360 and a CAD piece of software. I've been using FreeCAD. So, but if you guys will give us some input on the software side of things, if there's any other questions related to that stuff, let us know. Add some comments in the YouTube thread under this, or I'll put a post on Facebook asking this exact thing as well. If any of you guys reply to that, let us know. We'll have a brief break in June and July, and we'll come back and start that series. You guys look for the Ralph's Weathering Show tomorrow night, right? Is that right, Ralph?
Yep.
Yep. So we got Ralph's show coming up tomorrow night. That's always good to look forward to. The Railroad Empire series, again, this Saturday will be the first over-the-camera shot showing the multi-deck portion of my layout that I've been working on recently, as well as all the other guys' layouts as we work on those. So otherwise, we'll see you guys then. We'll call this show tonight, and we'll see you guys after the summer break. Thanks, John.